of day 24 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry. We've been listening more to Bob Lambert. We've heard him talking about his... we heard a lot of questions about his relationship with RLC. There was some really disgusting language used by Lambert where he talked about being mindful, about how she consented, the idea it was mutual. Consented in the moment, I think, was the phrase he used. It was really quite disturbing and like disgusting, really. I'm joined with Lisa, who is not on screen because she's got a restriction order. What did you make of his evidence?
Well, it's just, I haven't been here for the whole time that he's been speaking this week. Today is the first time I've actually made it in person, and it's very difficult. And it goes from being very difficult because it's slow and boring and because he's so ponderous, it's really hard to follow, to then, having moments like you were just talking about where it's really intense. The subject matter, suddenly gets really, really intense. And I'm very, very much reminded of the language that Mark Kennedy used when he was, doing interviews. This splitting personalities, this putting all the responsibility onto himself in the third person.
A lot of talking in third person, a lot of it.
This is what Bob Robinson made sure he had consent. So, but actually, and I think that, the barristers were quite robust in that respect, in that they were saying things like, they're really pushing him, you didn't give her the opportunity to consent to who you really were. I think that was almost paraphrasing what the barrister said, and I think that was, there's nothing he could say to that. No. He agreed with that, and I think there's some really good moments coming from the barrister to the inquiry in that respect. And it's weird because 1 minute you're kind of nearly dozing off because of the length of the pauses in between questions, to then suddenly being plunged into some very emotionally difficult stuff to listen to, and this whole kind of question of consent was definitely not avoided. They really put him on the spot about that, which I appreciated, but I found hard to listen to. But what I really want to say as well is that he is an absolute masterclass in calculatedness. I'm now, the more I listen to him, the more I realise that every single pause is not. It's not so much an act of being doddery. That is maybe what he's presenting, but actually, it's almost like you can see his mind working. Every single answer, every single pause is like, what shall I say this time? What would be the implications for me if I say this? And not just for his implications as Bob Robinson, the undercover officer, but he's also thinking about when, because he was the manager for so many of the ones that came after. What am I going to say when I am asked about Mark Jenner and his relationships undercover, where I was the manager? So he can't just say, the managers all knew. Partly he's protecting the cops and those people, but I think his number one priority is avoiding any responsibility on himself. And, and part of that is accepting the things he can't deny, which he's doing, but then, being as evasive as possible in all other respects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what he's doing. It was really telling when the discussion about RLC, he sped up. I mean, there was a lot less pauses. He'd obviously prepped himself on this section. He knew what he could get away with saying and what he couldn't get away with saying.
Yeah, he'd decided, okay, I'm going to come clean about some of this, so he could just speak without having to sort of overanalyze every answer before he gives it, kind of thing. Yeah, so it goes from absolutely you're going to fall asleep in every pause to suddenly it's really important, it's really emotional, and he's actually answering like a human, like an excuse for a human being.
Right, yeah. Like a man. I think there were some elements of it which, I think really kind of like portrayed a lot, gave us a lot of information really, where he said that the relationship with, such as it was with RLC, was closer to what his advice was, his guidelines were. Yeah,
and
keep
I
it casual.
To say, but didn't he deny? Earlier in the week, didn't he deny that he'd been given that advice? Or he said he couldn't recall?
Couldn't recall, yeah.
Yeah, so suddenly he can recall it.
It was really interesting, actually. There was one section, I forget what the question was, but it was, did he tell anybody afterwards that he'd had sex with RLC? And he said he didn't tell his managers, but he couldn't recall whether he'd said it to other activists or not. And then, after he'd gone through why he hadn't told the managers, Barr said to him, so why did you tell animal rights activists? And he's, I can't recall why I told them, blah, 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 blah. And he kept talking about it. And then Bar went, sorry, just check the transcript. You said you didn't tell them. Oh, right, yes. Yeah, I can't recall. And it was just that,
He can't even recall what he can't recall.
Right, exactly. Yeah, really caught out. One of the other things that he was questioned about, apart from RLC, which I think was the most important part.
The main thrust of it,
was about the What's Wrong with McDonald's leaflet.
Yes. So, we're coming to that and how, he sort of waffled on around, about things being written in aggregate or whatever. I can't even remember what the phrase they used.
A collaborative process.
Collaborative, that's it. Yeah, which is basically saying yes, but no, but yes, but no, but.
Yeah. And I mean, he's been asked to read the leaflet during the break and identify parts that he would have been responsible for. But it appears like he's going, oh no, I might have exaggerated at the time and said to people that I was a co-author, but in reality I wasn't.
And it's quite funny to think that despite everything that's been said about all of this, that he hasn't read it up until now, that he needs this break to go and have another look. Because, of course, this has been the main thrust of, a lot of the stuff that's been said about him in the press over the last sort of decade. You think he would have definitely read it before now.
Right.
We're not just talking about 40 years ago. We're talking about,
the most distributed political pamphlet in world history, right? I mean, this is, it's a pretty well-known document.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. I mean, we've got, like you say, we sort of slipped into some really fluent answering because he'd obviously thought about that and decided he was going to admit to things. We're now coming back to some of the stuff that he's, avoiding responsibility for. I mean, he really is a masterclass in avoiding responsibility. However, I don't think any of that is making him look good.
Oh, God, no, he looks terrible. He looks terrible.
He does, and I don't think it's going to work for him necessarily.
No. I mean, I think it's one of those things, isn't it? I think he's accepted that he's going to look terrible, but at least that he can kind of... He didn't land himself, he did...
It's damage limitation,
exactly.
Isn't it? Absolute damage limitation, which again reminds me of sort of everything that came out of Mark Kennedy's mouth when he was doing interviews. It was all about self-preservation, damage limitation, avoiding responsibility as much as possible, admitting to some of the things that you can't get, that you can't not admit to. I don't know. I mean, I haven't followed all of the other undercover officers that have given evidence in earlier tranches, but it seems to be quite in keeping with how they've all behaved.
I mean, I would say he's the most extreme version. There's a lot of officers who've just gone, can't recall, and not expanded, just going, I don't remember, long time ago. This combination of talking a lot, which is what Trevor Morris did, but talking slowly, which Trevor Morris is very fast. But then also just like giving all this information of off-topic stuff. I mean, a lot of the questions he's asked, he starts like pontificating. He asks himself questions. He answers those questions. He goes back and forth. he fills in, bits of information. Was I driving? Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. Was there a fourth person? Maybe there was. Maybe there wasn't. I mean, all that stuff. That's unique to him. I don't think anybody else.
It makes it really hard to follow, though, doesn't it?
Incredibly hard to follow.
And I can imagine very difficult to write it all down, which is what you're trying to do.
He's not very quotable. He starts.
I mean, maybe that's very deliberate as well.
I think it is. He starts sentences, and you're like, oh, this sounds like it's going somewhere, and then he stops, he pauses, he changes topic completely. I mean, occasionally I am tweeting exactly what he says. Yeah. Just to show how ridiculous it is. But largely it's very unquotable. There have been a few absolute zingers though, which unintentionally I think. Of just admittance of things. He didn't have evidence basically. The fact that he wasn't expected to have evidence, all that stuff.
I mean, that was really interesting, wasn't it? That that everything he says is supposition, and there's no way. Quoting casual conversation. Right. There's never going to be any comeback for an officer on that because nobody's going to be able to prove otherwise. Right. And it just shows what a sort of wide fishing net of an operation all of this was. None of it had a particular goal of evidence required for any particular thing, that it's all just generally to report hearsay and casual conversation and make friends with people and report on things like who's sleeping with who, that kind of thing. Yeah, no, totally. We haven't got a long break. We should go back in. Thanks for joining us. I'll do another recap right at the end. See you all later.